Hello, my name is Chris and today I'd like to talk about anxiety and smoking. I'd like to spend a little bit of time exploring the cause and effect cycle between the two. I want to share with you a few studies that I found whilst researching this subject which sort of provide evidence for the links between anxiety and smoking. And if it is okay with you, I'd like to offer a few of my own thoughts about what I think these studies show us and what it means for us in terms of quitting smoking. Before we get into that, this is your regularly scheduled reminder that next Saturday, September the 25th, is our monthly live stream hangout, 6:30 p.m. UK time. I do these live streams every single month, and inevitably every single month somebody will comment after the fact saying, oh no, Chris, I forgot all about it. I wanted to come and I totally forgot. If that is you and you don't want to miss the live stream this next Saturday, the best way to remember is if you click in the link in the card above and the description below. That will take you to the page where the live stream will be. You can click a little button that will give you a reminder so that when the live stream is coming up, you'll get a notification and then you don't have to forget. I'll also post it in our Finding Freedom group, facebook.com/groups/findingfreedom1, so you can pick it up there also. That is next Saturday. Today is this Friday, which means for now I'm going to forget about the live stream and just get into the video. The first thing that really fascinated me when I started looking into this subject was that the cause and effect cycle between anxiety and smoking is pretty much the same as it is for depression and smoking. You may recall a month or so back I made a few videos about depression, and one of them was about the links between depression and smoking. And I said that there was a sort of two-way thing going on, in that people with depression were more likely to smoke than those without depression, and yet at the same time smoking was more likely to exacerbate or prolong depression itself. And the same thing pretty much happens with anxiety. People who live with conditions like general anxiety disorder, or GAD if you prefer, are more likely to smoke than those who don't have any kind of anxiety disorders. And yet at the same time, smoking itself is more likely to exacerbate, enhance, possibly even trigger and cause anxiety or anxious responses. I looked into quite a few studies to sort of back this up and gain a better understanding of it. And I'm aware that reading studies and research papers is not perfect. If I come up with this study of, here's what this says, it's important to look at who commissioned the study, if there may be any potential bias, to also consider things like sample sizes. And I'm also aware that, for every study that proves one thing, there's probably another study out there that kind of proves something else. If I came to you today and said, hey, here's this research paper, this big academic study, which proves undoubtedly that the sky is blue, you would come back to me and say, actually, Christopher, I have found this study which says that the sky is bright pink and full of unicorns. So studies are not perfect, but I figured they are the best way to approach a subject like this rather than just making assumptions or coming up with my own theories. And there are a lot of studies that show us that there is a very strong association between people with anxiety and people who smoke. There was one study done in Australia by a guy called David Lawrence and his team of colleagues, and they looked at a sample size of 8,841 Australian adults aged between 18 and 65. Give myself a little pat on the back for remembering all those numbers. And they found that, they kind of looked at, what their mental health was like and whether they smoked or not. And they found that 1/5 of Australian adults who smoked also had an anxiety condition for at least 12 months. And the higher the level of anxiety, the greater the likelihood was that the person smoked. So if you had one group of people who had quite mild anxiety symptoms, and then you looked at another group of people who had really severely crippling anxiety symptoms, you would find that the number of smokers was significantly higher. The worse the anxiety got, the more people were likely to smoke. But even then, people with quite mild anxiety symptoms were still twice as likely to smoke than adults who had no mental health conditions or anxiety. There was another study carried out by the Department of Medicine at Cambridge Hospital in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and they discovered that people with mental health disorders, not just anxiety but other things as well, they were twice as likely to smoke than people with no mental health disorders. And the list of studies goes on and on and on, which shows that people with anxiety are more likely to smoke. And I will share these with you. If you look down in the description below, every study, every link that I've read on this subject will be down there for you if you want to check it out yourself or do your own research. So all of these studies are showing this strong association. If we have anxiety already, we're more likely to be smokers. And the reasons given for this, the reasons suggested are multiple. Much as was the case with depression, it's likely that some people will try to self-medicate with cigarettes. I'm feeling anxious, I'm going to go and have a cigarette and see if it helps. And I question whether it really does, or do we just kind of sit there still feeling anxious but now with a cigarette in hand? And if it does get rid of anything, is it not just getting rid of any anxious feelings that may have only been caused by the last cigarette in the first place? The other strong possibility that was suggested as to why people with anxiety are more likely to smoke was that they were more likely, especially in younger people, to give into peer pressure. To feel, to have feelings where they needed to fit into a group or something and give into peer pressure and smoke. There is another theory which is entirely my own and is backed up by nothing except for my own thoughts, and I also kind of wonder if things like environment and background and upbringing would play any kind of part in this. If we have been, if we've had a rough childhood, if we have strained relationships with parents and family members, if we're brought up in places of poor or low socio-economic status. Did I say socio-economic quite right? I think I did. If we grow up in those kind of backgrounds that are likely to, contribute to anxiety or depression or any kind of mental unwellness, is it not also likely that in those backgrounds we would be seeking some kind of escape or opportunity to rebel or to discover ourselves, and that may also lead us towards smoking? Like I say, I have no sort of evidence for that. It's just something that seems to resonate and sit right with me, that if we're brought up in these environments, and I think especially in some cases we're brought up in environments that trigger anxiety, and also being around people who smoke, and that may lead us to see this as kind of a coping mechanism in a way. coming back to this idea of self-medication, of using cigarettes to cope with, manage with, or distract from anxiety, and why it's very unlikely to be effective. Because most of the research out there shows us that actually anxiety can be exacerbated by smoking. That anxious responses are likely to be more intense and more enhanced if we smoke. And that actually smoking can even trigger, lead to, or increase the risk of developing anxiety and anxious symptoms in the first place. There's a team at Vrij University in Amsterdam, and I'm pretty sure I've pronounced Vrij University properly because I googled it, and they did this study which showed that people who smoked were smoking was more likely to lead to a first ever instance of mental health disorders. And I'm going to have to check my notes on this because I keep getting confused. What they did, this team at Vrij University, they interviewed smokers at 3-year intervals and discovered that if somebody smoked, they had an increased risk of developing a mental health disorder even if they had never had one before. So the more this was showing, the more that we smoke, the more likely it is that even if our mental health has been completely fine, the more likely we are to develop things like GAD or other anxiety symptoms or mental health disorders. Likewise, over in New York at Columbia University, they looked at an association between adolescents who smoked and the impact on their mental health in early adulthood. And they found that when teenagers smoked, they were more likely to suffer with panic attacks and panic disorders in early adulthood. And this study at Columbia University wasn't the only one to pick up on this. There's a surprisingly large amount of research looking at the association between teenagers who smoke and panic attacks, especially, and panic disorders. And there does seem to be this strong correlation. And that totally makes sense to me. If you think about how many of us smoked, or started to smoke, should I say, when we were teenagers, when we were kids, and then how many of us got older and suddenly went, oh my goodness, I'm so anxious, why is my mental health so poor? That link totally makes sense to me. And I think in that case, if you're watching this and you are younger, this means now is an ideal time to quit so that you don't have to deal with half the crap that I've had to deal with and other people have had to deal with. There is also a ton, and I mean a ton, of research into the impact that smoking has on our brains and on our internal systems and how that may influence anxiety. I read so much on this stuff that I'm going to make a separate video about it because otherwise we would be here all day and I talk enough as it is. But there's a lot of research that looks at how smoking messes up our neurotransmitter systems, how it causes changes in the white matter in our brains, how it leads to oxidative and nitrosative stress. I hope I've pronounced those words correctly. And all of these things are common in people with anxiety. And I read all this stuff and I was thinking, this smoking, pardon my language, but smoking fucks us up in so many ways that we don't even realise when we're smoking. We all know that it damages our lungs and it leads to heart disease and all these nasty, horrible things, but we don't even think about what it's doing to this. All those changes in the white matter are, also evident in people with Alzheimer's and dementia and all kinds of horrible things. And there is evidence out there again which shows a strong correlation between things like an increased risk of dementia and smoking. And again, I'm going to put that in another video because it fascinated me, blew my mind, and yet at the same time made so much sense. If smoking is wreaking havoc with our neurotransmitter systems, and we're not getting the right kind of chemicals going on in our brains, in our bodies, it makes sense that we're more likely to struggle with anxiety. And finally, the one thing that I discovered in my research, which was kind of alarming, but again, not too surprising, was it was saying that yes, increased exposure to nicotine is definitely going to lead to an increased risk of anxiety and things like GAD, but so is exposure to just cigarette smoke. And again, they looked at how cigarette smoke impacts our neurotransmitters, impacts our biological systems. And there was research done that looked at exposure prenatally, in infancy, in adolescence, and how that later influenced people's anxiety responses. And again, there was a strong link. And I thought two different things about this. One, that again it makes sense. I don't know if there are many people, I mean there are going to be some people, but I don't know of many people who are like the only person they've ever known who smoked. I think when we're growing up, a lot of us, again not all of us, but a lot of us have older influences in our lives who smoke. And then if we're exposed to that for a long time, again that makes sense that we may, start struggling with these things as we get older. But what it also made me think about is about parents now and adults now with children around, what we may, if we smoke, expose them to. I've shared so many times that the best way to quit is to have these intrinsic motivations, as in wanting to do it for ourselves and not for other people. But I do think, if someone is smoking and they have children, and it could be, not even just thinking about what it's doing to their lungs, but about what it's doing to their brains and their mental health, that may be a motivator to quit smoking. Of course, I say all this, and then you come back to me and say, yeah, but actually, Chris, when I quit smoking, my anxiety was far worse than it's ever been. Actually, Chris, I had no anxiety, and then I quit smoking, and then I felt terrible. So how the hell do you explain that? I'll tell you in the next video. Today I wanted to explore the links. Next time I want to explore what we can do about anxiety when we're quitting smoking. Both in terms of if we already have anxiety and we want to quit, and if quitting smoking brings about an anxiety that we've never had before. So we'll get to that next week. But today I want to finish with just something that just totally makes sense to me and hopefully to you. If there is all this evidence which shows us that smoking can exacerbate, enhance, trigger, cause, lead to, develop an increased risk of anxiety, then it absolutely makes sense that if we want to get rid of our anxiety, we should perhaps at least try to get rid of the cigarettes first. It's quite common to say, I've got all this anxiety and I want to deal with the anxiety, but I'm also smoking, but I'll deal with the anxiety first and then I'll be in a better position to give up the cigarettes. I don't want to give up the cigarettes while I'm trying to get over my anxiety, because I need them, I use them, they're helpful, they're a crutch. When actually, I think if we said, well, I've got all this anxiety but I'm also smoking, But if I give up smoking first, I am in a much better position to actually deal with my anxiety in the long run. Because I can take all of the medication in the world. I mean, please don't take all the medication in the world, but you know what I mean. I can take all of the medication in the world. I can go to all the therapy in the world. I can do 1,000,001 mindfulness techniques and CBT exercises. And yet, if I'm still smoking these things that are messing up my neurotransmitters, changing my brain, increasing my anxiety, I'm not giving myself a fighting chance of doing this. So it may as well be, let's deal with the cigarettes first. And yes, it might be tough. Yes, it might feel like tearing your hair out. But we can move past that. And again, I'll talk about that in the next video. We can move past that, and then we are in a much, much better position to be able to finally deal with this anxiety once and for all, rather than trying to, it's kind of, I can't think of a good analogy for it, but it's kind of like, filling in, well, let's say the anxiety is a hole. We're filling in the hole with one hand and then emptying it back out with the other. We're trying to help our anxiety and yet at the same time still making it worse. So let's stop making it worse first. Whew. We got through another video. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for sticking around all the way to the end. I hope you found this helpful, or at least a little bit interesting. If you would like to hear me talking more about quitting smoking, you can of course hit the subscribe button down below. I would really appreciate that. That helps me out a lot. There is of course my book. It is called Quit Smoking and Be Happy. It is available in print and ebook form from Amazon. And if you've enjoyed the book and you'd like to leave me a review on Amazon, I would really very much appreciate that. There's also Finding Freedom, facebook.com/group/findingfreedom1, where there's just this awesome community of people who I absolutely love, who are celebrating one another's successes and helping each other out when things aren't going so well, and also sharing their own tips and thoughts and insights and words of wisdom into the things that help them quit. So it'd be lovely to see you in the group. Finally, just one last reminder, next Saturday, September 25th, monthly live stream, 6:30 p.m. It'd be great if you could come along and say hello, or if you want to just stick around, please do so. It'd be great to chat with you. Bring questions, bring any topics of conversation you'd like me to talk about, because I plan absolutely nothing for these live streams, so I never know what to talk about until you ask me stuff. Thank you so much again for watching. I will see you next week. Goodbye.